is hard from a pastoral perspective to be what others think you should be, or even worse, being what you think you should be, instead of being what God has called us to be.
Absolutely.
All right, we'd like to welcome you to our Pass the Baton podcast. Passing on what's been passed on to us, a podcast about life, ministry, and everything in between. My name is Tom Kaiser, and this is
Jon Rematera.
And we are your co-hosts for this podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Floyd Harmon. Floyd, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. Appreciate you asking me on the show.
And so Floyd and I kind of go way back, sort of. When we both went to Southern Adventist University for our undergraduates, and I did my student pastoring at Battlefield Community, Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then Floyd came a couple of years after me, and so he got to work with some of the same fine people I did. And before Floyd got hired in the conference, I got a couple of messages saying, "Hey, we heard that this Cody guy is going to be coming to your conference, and he's pretty good people. Take care of him." So,
well, I'll follow that up with the thing from Battlefield. When I got there, all I heard about was Tom Kaiser this and Tom Kaiser that, and they say it's difficult to fill someone else's shoes. I finally just had to throw those shoes away.
Well, that's mostly because they didn't fit him well, and they were pretty smelly.
Oh boy.
Well, anyway, today on our podcast, we're going to be talking about kind of the highs and the lows of pastoral ministry, which, obviously there's been a lot of those in our lives. And, just kind of start us off, Floyd, man. Let just talk about, whatever God puts on your heart, talk about, the good things of pastoral ministry, the struggles of pastoral ministry. And just so you know, just feel free to be open and honest about what we're doing, because we're just wanting to just have a conversation.
Yeah, before you share, Floyd, I just want to also add that I am very much appreciative of him, because he's a really good friend, and he has the best accent, the best diction of a communicator as they come. So Floyd, I'm sorry, he's also known as the Floyd.
The Floyd.
The Floyd.
Oh, bless your heart.
So
the problem with being placed on any kind of a pedestal is that the higher the pedestal, the more pieces you shatter whenever you fall off of it. So, anyway.
Well, let's back up just a little bit. We failed to tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, before we get into the.
Just brief some highlights. I'm from a little old town in South Carolina called Gilbert. It's about the size of your mailbox. Some people just call it Gilbert. I call it home. Where I was raised in a swamp down there on some family land that's been there for about 5 generations, and. My family been Seventh-day Adventist pretty much all my life. My roots, my mom and dad's roots in the Methodist Church, and grew up a country boy and went to the Marine Corps right out of high school. Out of there, I had a kind of a conversion experience, you could call it that, and skipping a lot of interesting things in between. I got the call to ministry after a disappointment. I got injured and was not able to stay in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And through that experience, the Lord has pulled me into ministry, and it's been an interesting life ever since.
All right. Well, tell us about some of those interesting things. What have been some of the highlights of your ministry? What are some things you really enjoyed about ministry?
You can go to the cliche things. I love to see souls baptized and saved, and that's true. I do. I think for me, if I can do like a personal one and then more of a general. Other-centered one, for lack of a better word. For me, one of the highlights of pastoral ministry has been, I can't get over the fact that, a lot of people, they wake up in the morning, they work a regular job, and maybe they have children, maybe they don't, but everything is competing for their time with the Lord. I am paid and provided with the opportunity each day to spend time with the Lord. I don't have to fight a 9-to-5 job. I don't have to fight taking kids to school. I don't have to fight a number of things that struggle for the time in everybody else's schedule to spend time with the Lord. I am so privileged to be able to have my week laid out to spend time with the Lord, so that I can pastor and lead people to Christ.
Jon, what about you?
again, with the cliches, it's nice and it's always a blessing to see people come to the Lord. And I think for me, it's just seeing the change, the growth, not just of people that come into the faith new, which is always awesome, but I think that even the saints that have been in the church for a long time, seeing I guess that sparkle in their eye when they come to a deeper knowledge of Jesus, and I think that's incredibly rewarding to me. And working with people of all age groups, and just being able to sit down and speak with them, just real talk about life and faith and just journeying with people. We often overcomplicate ministry to the point where it's just like, if I'm not, giving them, 28 Bible studies, then I'm not doing ministry. But there's so many aspects of ministry: the ministry of presence, the ministry of just listening and praying for people, whether you pray with them or
building those relationships.
Yeah, praying for them in your private time. I think for me, that's one of the more beautiful moments of ministry that I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for me, I love working with people on the one-to-one, right? I like to sit down and have lunch with somebody. I like to have folks over at my house and, do a cookout, or I like the social aspects of being in people's lives, and even the more difficult things, like when somebody's dealing with the loss of a job or the loss of a loved one or any of those type of things. Though I struggle personally with that kind of stuff, I find that to probably be the most rewarding, is to be able to have somebody say thank you when you're there with them during whatever the difficult times their life is.
We've been pastoring long enough now. We've changed districts at least once. Mm-hmm. And I can remember when I left my last district, I was kind of shocked because I put so much time into preaching and preparing and delivering sermons and stuff. And I know we know pastoral ministry is so much bigger than preaching. Mm-hmm. But it was one thing that when we left, I thought if anybody was going to say anything like, Pastor, we were going to miss your preaching. They never said a word about my sermons. Everything that they said was, you were there for me when.
Yeah.
And I think that is really where the meat of the real effectiveness, the benefit of pastoral ministry comes in, is being able to be with people through life.
Yeah. And on top of that, when you think about ministry, it's often the ones ministering. But I also find that in the process of ministering, I'm also ministered to. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, as pastors, even we kind of put this kind of persona on us that we're observers from a distance. We kind of close ourselves off from our members because you can't share with everybody, right? Mm-hmm. But in a way that kind of inhibits our own growth, because then where's our community? But one of the things that I really have been blessed with in all of the churches that I've pastored is that there are those people that you can put your hair down, so to speak, and be real about life and carrying each other's burdens, as the Bible tells us. And I have found some of, I guess, just simple things like random texts in the morning or in the evening of members saying, Pastor Jon, I'm praying for you.
How necessary is that for your mental health?
Oh, it's so necessary. It's so necessary.
Yeah.
Just knowing that, and of course, we're not doing this for accolades. We're not doing this for, attention. But those small affirmations.
Pastors need pastors too.
Yeah, those affirmations, if not from the members, but from colleagues, and that's the other thing that I really love about ministering, is that I'm ministering together with you guys. And we're real about our situations, and we can call each other, and just having that community, that brotherhood, has been incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, I know, especially when you're saying the text message from members. I've got a couple of members throughout my pastoral ministry that would just send me a text that was a prayer. Mm. They would text their prayer to God to me. Wow. For the affirmation that they're praying for me. And there's something about knowing that, somebody saying, I'll pray for you. And I don't know if I'm maybe the duck in this pond, but I will often tell people that I'll pray for them. If I don't stop and pray for them right then, sometimes it goes to the back of my mind. Yeah. And, even in my prayer, I'm like, God, I know that there's somebody I said I was going to pray for today. I don't remember, or last week, please intercede on behalf of that one, because my scattered brain goes all over the place, and I go to the next point of ministry. But to have somebody send you that message, say, hey, I'm praying for you. And I've tried to reciprocate that. Like, I've actually learned that from my members. Like, I will text somebody and say, hey, listen, I just want to let you know that I just spent time praying for you and your family, whatever situation you're going through. And I feel like that's been cathartic for me, even though, and I've had people say thank you, and I've had people that just don't respond back because, life gets busy, and so I don't get upset or anything like that one. But just the idea of knowing of that there's this camaraderie within the church, that even as a pastor, we can not just minister and give Bible studies and grow the kingdom and use all this language that we like to use, but we can actually have an impact on people's lives. And I often say this jokingly, but I mean this pretty for real. It's like God saves me through my pastoral ministry, because I don't know if I would depend upon him as much as I
completely agree
do now, because I feel so inadequate in my role as a pastor. And that's something that I've always struggled with, is my insufficiencies as a pastor. And so the fact that I've got members that do that, that's such a huge blessing. It's been such a high point in my ministry, is knowing that members are praying for me or encouraging me. That's huge for me.
To see and to be seen and to be known is just a vital part of health in the human nature. If you remember the story when Hagar was fleeing from Sarah after she was, she kind of got a little haughty towards her mistress there. She's fleeing out towards the wilderness, and God meets her there, and she's about to, things not going good for her and whatnot. And at the end of that interaction there in Genesis, she calls God the name that means you are the God who sees.
Yeah.
And to see and to be seen and to be known and just to be recognized. I know, I see what you're going through. You're not falling between the cracks. That's a huge part of spiritual health for pastors and members alike.
Okay. Well, and when we look at this, obviously, we're talking about the highs of pastoral ministry, and I kind of want to, I wanted to start off on the highs, and then I think I want to get back to it. But there's also struggles in pastoral ministry.
Only a few.
So let's talk about some of the things that maybe just your own personal struggles, or our own personal struggles within pastoral ministry itself. What are some things that, maybe not, don't throw a member on blast or anything like that. But what are some things that are struggles for you in pastoral ministry? Because we all understand that all of us have different trigger points, or we have different things that we struggle with. Something John struggles with, I may not struggle with. Something you struggle with, John may not struggle with, and vice versa. What's something that you yourself struggle with?
I mean, I wish you'd have given me these questions ahead of time. I could have made you a list, but it's probably good you didn't.
There's a reason that we wanted this to be off the cuff. So for the listeners that are watching us or listening to this, none of this is pre-scripted. This is all, we just sit there and said, this is the topic that we're going to be talking about, the highs and lows of ministry. And that's all foreknowledge that any of us really had. And we've not really prepared for this, so...
the easiest thing for me to do is to start with what I'm dealing with right now. Things ebb and flow; they come and go as the year moves on. But I would say right now, one of the big challenges that I have is consistency. Being able to get up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, to structure my day in such a way, because you always get those surprises. You can make the best of plans. The best of plans always get interrupted. And I'll never forget, I think it was Richie Halverson, who he said he puts a sticky note there on his desk or computer or something like that to remind himself that when he gets those interruptions, the sticky note says, it's about the people, stupid. And it's so easy for me to get so frustrated because it throws my entire day off. And I'm a planner. I thrive on structure. And when the structure is not there, I get very frustrated. I begin to crumble, and I'm not as effective, and maybe my thinking is not as good. So, right, for me, consistency and keeping a schedule through the day that I can accomplish the task before me without interruption, that is a challenge for me right now.
Well, so how do you keep it about the people then? Because we've got Well, let's back up. What does a day in the life of Pastor Floyd look like? What is a day in the life of? Because most people don't actually know. I mean, how many times have we heard the jokes like we work one day a week, right? And so, pastoral burnout and people leaving the ministry, the statistics are through the roof because of the amount of pressure and stress that pastors are under. What does an average day look like? What is let's do just a generic slow day or a generic busy day, right?
Okay, so if I wasn't here today, my average Tuesday would start probably around Ideally, if I wake up at 6 o'clock, my day, because I have a lot of physical issues that I deal with in my military service, first 3 hours, it takes me 3 hours to actually sit down and start pastoring the day, but it begins, the first 45 minutes is devotions. And then I'll spend the next hour and a half after that doing physical therapy and stretching. Then I'll have breakfast, get dressed, and usually by 9 o'clock, I'm sitting down. And from 9 to about noon or 1, ideally, without interruptions, is a sermon prep study or some reading that pertains to what I'm studying for that week. And then I'll take an hour or two, usually a couple hours for lunch, because I'll eat and then I'll do another round of stretching or maybe run an errand or something like that. And then probably around 2 to 3 o'clock, I'm sitting back down, I'm answering emails, because by that time of the day, they're getting full. I answer emails, do some admin stuff for a while, and then usually by 5 o'clock or so, it's time to leave to go do visitations or prayer meeting or something like that. So that's a typical day, minus the surprises that we will sometimes get through the day.
Okay, John, what's a typical day look like for you?
I mean, basically almost the same in terms of, obviously we all wake up, so I think
we start there.
Right, yeah. Devotions, exercise. I haven't been as consistent with exercise, I'm going to admit. But then, of course, breakfast. And then I usually do my office work in the morning, which kind of leaves the afternoon and evening for errands and for visits and for meetings.
What time does your day normally end? No, I'm not talking about when you go to bed. I'm talking about when you stop pastoring under usual circumstances.
Okay, so that's a good question. I try to not cut off, but like I don't answer phone calls after 9 o'clock. Like I have to set a healthy boundary. Anything, if you call me after 9 o'clock, if it's an emergency, I encourage you to call 911. Because I mean, what can we do? It's just like if you're bleeding, it's like, okay, I'm not trained in first paramedics. Yeah. I mean, first aid. Yeah, we know first aid, but it's just like maybe you should call 911. So I make that. I think that setting healthy boundaries is extremely important for our own health, because it's just like, wait a second, you should be. There's this misunderstanding that pastors are on call 24/7.
Sure.
But that's the last time I checked on my birth certificate. It's John, not Jesus. I am not the Lord, and I am not omnipresent. Nor do I have unlimited amounts of energy. So for my own health, 9 o'clock is where I cut off in terms of phone calls, text messages, and emails.
I'm going to cut you off here, Tom, but mine, just to follow that over there, I usually, between visitation and prayer meeting during the regular week, I find it difficult to end my day before 8 o'clock most times.
Yeah.
So that's typical.
Yeah. And so, and of course, I'm the oddball with this group here because, I'm married with a family. And so my day starts generally much earlier than that. I usually get up around 5:15. And that's where I actually start off with like some kind of exercise, stretching.
Sure.
I need to do more cardiovascular and those type of things because the little pudge between my chest and my legs is larger COVID wise. But even then, some kind of stretching, because again, same with you. I have military service. I've got jacked up knees. My back is messed up, and so it takes me a while to get lubricated and start moving and whatnot. And because of the extra weight that I have. And so, I'll do stretches for 15, 20, 30 minutes. And usually by 6 o'clock, I try to have my devotional time. During the school year, I'll start working on, finishing up any preparation I need to teach class. I usually teach a Bible class around 8 o'clock, going to the school and whatnot. Summer, it's a little bit different. And then it's usually, I try to eat something for breakfast. And then I get out the door usually about 7:15 to 7:30, heading to the church, and work from the church. I'll do teach Bible class. We'll do chapel, whatever things I need to do at this church, or if I need to finish up anything in my office at the church. And then from there, I'll do any kind of morning meetings or whatnot. In the afternoon, I kind of take the afternoon for my sermon preparation time, or devotional, like preparation for devotionals, or whatever professional development and whatnot. And on an ideal day, without interruptions, which I think I get maybe 1 or 2 of those a week where they're ideal, and then the other 3 or 4, there's usually something else that comes up. And then I try to reserve I try to finish up around 5:30. So 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, I try to dedicate for family time. This is so we can, 5:30 or something, I start cooking dinner, or, because most days I try to cook dinner so Amy doesn't have to worry about that with her teaching schedule. But we kind of go back and forth depending on the week. And then, we'll watch some TV together, or we'll play some kind of games together. And then around 8 o'clock, we'll try to have family worship. And then afterwards, I'll still answer the phone, sometimes up to 9:30, depending on what it is. And if it's like a real emergency,
Right.
If it's a voicemail, I'll get back with them and whatnot. But I try to kind of have that same cutoff around 9 o'clock, if at all possible. And then in the evening, I'll play a game or I'll do something like that for my own downtime.
Kind of de-stress.
If I can. That's the nights that we don't have board meetings. Like this week I've got board meeting tonight, which technology is Zoom. I can still be here and do the board meeting. And then Thursday night we've got school board meeting and stuff like that. So the family time sometimes gets run back, but I try to make sure that at least on Sundays, I try to devote that to family time. Friday afternoon, Friday evenings, I try to make sure that I spend especially if I've got several board meetings or several evening meetings or whatnot. And then a lot of my visitation is mostly Sabbats, and usually maybe one or two during the week. Like I'll try to meet somebody at their workplace, or I'll try to have a conversation while I'm doing other things. So I'm not as good with going down and sitting down and doing a visitation or in-home Bible study or something like that. I try to kind of incorporate that at the church. Like, hey, let's go down to the coffee shop and let's get a drink or whatever the case may be. Let's go and have this conversation or have lunch together, because I'm already going to be eating and whatnot. And so I try to incorporate my visitation into that one. So that's kind of what it looks like for me.
So basically, as you probably, all of you that are listening or watching can see, depending on our situation, our context, and even our marital status, that affects our schedule. So one of the beautiful things about being a pastor is that we pretty much are in control of our schedule. There are some things that are fixed, but for the most part, we can move things around. That gives us some versatility. But Floyd and I shared a look earlier when you mentioned, your family, because we can identify with that. And Floyd, I'm curious. So maybe we need to come back and do a whole segment on this. But you and I are both single pastors. How is that going for you? In terms of like being a single pastor, like how are the churches?
So is this
interacting
an up or
with
is this
you?
a down?
Yeah, I mean, is it an up? Is it a down? Because I can, yeah.
Let me see if I can save you from your question asking. I think if I want to focus on any pros to being a single pastor, if there's any positives about it that I can see, is obviously that I don't have anybody that I need to split my time with.
Right.
And so I don't have that demand. And that's a good thing. I mean, if you have a family, it's a blessing. You should spend time there, but I don't have that ask on my time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if
Paul
someone
talks about that too.
Exactly. If someone needs me to do some weird thing at some weird time, I don't have to check with anybody, and I don't see that as a chain. I see that as it's an availability. I'm more available.
Yeah. It's well
I'm not as available, I think, sometimes as they still want me to be. It's like, you don't have an excuse. You're not. You don't have it's like, yeah, but I still take Sundays off and try not to be bothered as much as possible. But cons, I mean, I think that we are innately built to have companionship. When you go back to creation, we believe in Scripture, which I hope we do as pastors here. We see that was the foundational plan of God. For humanity, mankind, not to be alone, and specifically in a marriage context, we see that right at the beginning. And so, if I can be brief with it, that's a big ask for me, I know. That is a hole in my life. Mm-hmm. It is something that I feel quite keenly a lot of times. To know that I'm going to go home tonight and there will be nobody there but myself. That can become heavy emotionally, and it ebbs and flows depending on how busy you are and stuff. But I can remember in my first district where I pastored, I would literally, when I got done with the visit or our prayer meeting, I would drive around town until 11 o'clock at night because I dreaded going home alone.
Wow.
I was just going to go home to an empty space with nobody there to share my life with, to share the day with, to talk about ups, downs, anyway, alone. And so I'll stop right there. Just that was a pro and a con for me.
Yeah. And before we get into John, you answering this question, I do want to, for those that are maybe not familiar with the Adventist Church, is when Floyd said this probably 2 or 3 times now, a district. Our organizational structure is such where all of us are district pastors. That means that all of us pastor more than one church. So I pastor 2 churches. John, you pastor 3, and you pastor 3 churches. And so, of course, where I have only the 2 churches, we also have a school and other things as well. And so when we say district, that means our grouping of Adventist churches that we are over, and then all 3 of us are, as we talked about in our intro, our first episode, John and I are in the same support area, pastoral support group area. Floyd is in a different pastoral support group area, but we're all in the same conference, which our conference is the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference, which shout out to them because we're using their equipment.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for allowing us to use this. And then the White House Seventh-day Adventist Church for allowing us to use their facilities. And Marshall, who has helped us kind of make sure we had everything set up and go. But we were all part of a larger church family that encompasses the western portion of Tennessee, or maybe the central to western portion of Tennessee, and the entire state of Kentucky. So I just wanted to, for those that may not be Adventists that are listening to this or understanding our church structure, that's kind of what we mean when we say district. So John, do you want to come back to
and I thank you, Floyd, for being so honest about that, because when we there's a stigma about being a single pastor, and it is essentially an unspoken rule that pastors generally should be married. And I remember going through my pastoral interviews with conferences, and one of the questions they asked were, "Are you married?
Are you about to be married?
Are you about to be married? Is there any hope for you?" I mean, I understand, they'd want us to be paired up with somebody, to be partners, but also to have a companion. I get that. But to what you shared, Floyd, about, we definitely have a lot more time, at least, not having to divide our time, not that spending time with family is bad, but we have a little bit more versatility and flexibility in our scheduling to do what we do. And of course, as a single person, you want to be married unless you're called to be single. There are certainly those that do that. But being single as a pastor, I actually find it funny now how some people try to hook you up with people.
Oh my, yeah.
I got to share this story. I'm in one of my churches. The first time that I went there, I sat down with this one family. They had young adult kids, and their daughter was sitting across from me. My first time sitting, having a meal, and this one old lady, bless her heart, she wheeled up to us in her wheelchair, and she was like, "I just want you to know that I was talking to God over there, and He told me that you two are going to be married."
Was she a false prophet?
She definitely is a false prophet, because that did not come to fruition. But I was just like, wow, this is my first time in this church, first time meeting this person. I'm like, if there was ever a chance, it's over. But no, she was cool about it. But that's just one of many
daughters and granddaughters,
daughters,
and nieces,
granddaughters, and strange,
friends.
and strange It's just like I appreciate people trying to help me out, but man. Let's not make it awkward. I'm like saying, it's like I appreciate the people that mean well, but come on, let's do a little bit better. But it is a challenge, it is a struggle. But there's ups and downs in ministry.
To have a partner in ministry, and we don't have to be exactly alike, of course, but to have the same goal. We love God supremely. We have a burden for souls. And we are moving in the same direction together. We can be prayer partners. She can be whoever she wants to be, have her career, whatever, as long as we're united on that front, and to have someone to share the burden of ministry with. That is when I think about, why do you want to be married? Well, first, because I'm still a man. Secondly, because this is a tough burden to carry alone.
Yeah.
And speaking on the other side, and thank you for that. And I think actually, John, I think I've had every single pastor I've ever known has had that story where they've had the prophetess, and usually it's an older woman that has a prophecy from God that they're going to marry somebody, usually their family member. And my buddy Josh Withers, he actually sit there and says like, well, when God gives me the same vision He's given you, then we'll know that it's from God. But until then, I'm going to assume that it's not.
That's good counsel right there.
And but there is that. So there, and it's the pros and cons, like we're talking about here, of being married. Is the pro is I've got somebody in my wife that I can vent my frustrations to. I don't go into any personal details or any sin issues or anything like that, but I can sit there and say, well, man, me and this one member of my church, we've been really struggling with this one, or, man, this is, I need your help on this one. Honey, can we just sit there and pray about this? There is so much benefit but doing that, but there's also this unwritten and sometimes verbalized, and in some cases I've even seen written, people like boards writing this stuff out as the expectations of the pastor's wife, expectations of the pastor's children, which are unrealistic, because here's the truth of the matter is, as a pastor, I'm still trying to figure out how to be a father. I'm trying to learn how to raise my girls to keep them in the church, because quite honestly, it scares me being a father in the 21st century and seeing the number of kids leave the church and go into the world, that I don't want some well-meaning church member to push my kids out of the church because of, one, the way they treat them, or two, which happens far more frequently, is the way the church treats me. And so that's like one of the downsides for me is there's these expectations, and I haven't had to deal with that as much as other pastors, mostly because my wife is very ministry focused. Because some pastors' wives, they want to just do their job. They want to just go to church. Maybe they're introverted, or maybe they're not that, and that's completely okay. Sure. And church members need to understand that not every pastor's wife is going to teach the children Sabbath school, is going to play the piano, is going to lead song service, is going to be your head deaconess. Not every wife's called to that, and I know my wife's not called to a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Right? My wife, she does love working with kids. She's a teacher, so of course she loves working with kids, but and we love doing some of the hostess type of things, but she's more of a kind of a background person. She doesn't want to be up front leading any of these type of things, and she's much more of a supportive person.
How do you defend against those kinds of unrealistic expectations? When they throw that list at you, how do you defend against that and still...
Are you going to pay her salary? I mean, realistically,
that's a fair question.
The Bible says the worker is worth their wages.
Yes.
And I haven't felt that in this conference, but I've even heard of friends in other conferences that the conference expectations was the wives to be involved. It's like, well, you didn't get a 2-for-1 deal here.
Right.
Pastors are already paid on the lower end of what our educational requirements are, because Adventist pastors typically are required to have at least a bachelor's degree, and most of us are encouraged to go on to get at least some level of master's degree, whether it be going to the seminary or to get a master's in something or be pursuing higher education. That's the expectation of just about every conference I've ever heard of. There are some outliners, but that's by and far, and people that I know with my education level make far more money. And of course, none of us are in this for the money. Right. But then on top of that, they're expected, the expectation of the family to do all these different things. And my family are very active. I want my kids to be active in church. Right. I want my wife to be active in church. But I'm my wife's best friend. She's my best friend, but I'm also her pastor. And I don't want them to put unrealistic expectations on them. And for the most part, I think most of my churches like my wife better than me because my wife is just an amazing person. But we go for a
pastor. We'll miss your wife.
right. Yeah. My wife and I like to go on walks in the evening. That's kind of our decompressing time. So we go for during that 6 to 8 time. We like to go for usually at least a mile to a mile and a half, 2 mile walk, and that's where we kind of decompress and talk about what she's struggling with as a school teacher within the Adventist system, and what kind of where we're trying to minister together and whatnot. She doesn't really get a lot of that because my church is super supportive of her as well. And so I have been lucky, I believe, especially from the stories that I've heard, that she's not that. So the positives of it is, yes, you get that person that you get to share, you get to share these very intimate moments with on especially when you're talking about baptizing somebody and the joys of that, and just the passion when you have very similar passions in ministry. There is so much benefit to that. And then seeing my kids grow up and seeing my kids getting up and now starting to lead song service and telling children's story and asking really, really deep questions and very thought-provoking questions. These things are all amazing type of things, but the expectations on the pastor's family, and we've all heard the glass bowl, the fish bowl, they expect everything in your life to be absolutely perfect. Well, I'm not perfect. My kids are not going to be perfect. My kids are going to make mistakes, and I'm going to not enforce upon my kids like, well, you have to be perfect when we're at church, because none of us are.
Right.
We have to tear down these false ideas that the pastor's family, the pastor is on some kind of pedestal. Like, we were talking earlier, and I don't know if it was before we started recording this or afterwards, but you sit there and said, like, stop putting me on a pedestal, because the higher the pedestal, the more pieces I break into when I fall. That really is true, because a lot of times people get disenfranchised when they find out their pastor does X, Y, or Z that they don't approve of. Part of it is, well, we make a conscious decision to do what we do, and some of it is we are still struggling.
It's like pastors are not given room by some people. They're not given room to grow. It's
Yes.
like you have already obtained. Paul says, "I have not yet obtained,"
Right.
but pastors are supposed to have apparently.
And when Paul said that, he had already planted something like 18 different churches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you would think that he's the church growth expert, successfully planting these churches. Yet Paul had not gotten that. In fact, if you actually read Paul's letters chronologically, he starts off by sitting there saying, well, I was an apostle of the apostle, a Pharisee of the Pharisee. But by the end of it, toward one of the last letters that Paul wrote is where he writes the famous passage, I am the chief of all sinners. And the closer we draw to Christ, the more that we see our sinfulness.
Right.
And I think the less that we are inclined to see the sinfulness in others and try to point that out. It's like, well, oh, you dirty, filthy sinner, something like that. And it's, for me, I can't sit there and say, well, Floyd, you're a great sinner, because I see those faults in myself. And this is my own, the own downside to ministry is I, maybe even outside of the expectations of the church, put these expectations on myself of what a pastor should be. Because I often sit there and say, I'm not the ideal pastor. I mean, moving to a new church scares me, because the new people have got to get to know who I am. The church members I have now know that I'm a goofball, that I'm silly, that I don't have it all together. I've got a short temper at times. And it really is hard from a pastoral perspective to be what others think you should be, or even worse, being what you think you should be, instead of being what God has called us to be.
Absolutely.
So we're getting kind of close to the end of the time, and I want us to start kind of wrapping this up. But if you could share one of the most meaningful experiences, as this is confirmation of my call from God. Maybe because I don't know if you've ever questioned your call to ministry, but I've questioned my call to ministry probably every other Tuesday. But what has been that confirmation moment for you, that high of highs, that Elijah mountain? Let's don't worry about even if you did fall into the valley and said, God, I just want to die. What was that high point where you know that God affirmed you in your ministry? We want to start with you.
I can remember after the Marine Corps when I was, quote, told I was called to ministry. In 2011, I got out in 2008 from the Marine Corps. 2011, I had an experience, and won't go into that. We don't have time. But I can tell you that from 2011 until, I can give you a month, August of 2018, what's that, 7 years? Something like that, 7, 8 years, somewhere around there. I did not know personally. I did not feel personally that I'd had that confirmation from God. I was pretty much pastoring because I was broke and couldn't go back into I say physically broke and could not go back into the military, which is what I wanted to do for a career. Yeah. And I was just put in situations where preaching and ministry and stuff was happening in my life, and everybody, all the old people said, "Oh, young man, you're going to be a pastor." and so, but that's the way, that's the doors that were open for me. But I never had that great conviction or that great, a Damascus Road experience kind of a thing, And so to answer your question, let me get to the point. 2018, I got back from a tour that I took. I was at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan, doing my Master of Divinity degree there. And I was having my devotions, and I had been working through the book of John, and I hadn't had my devotions now in like 3 weeks. I was on a low, man. It might have been more like 3 months, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Oh, it was for a long time, and I had stopped at a particular place at John chapter 16 and verse 14. 15 and verse 14. And that was 3 months ago. I got back from this tour, and I was just God, I don't even want to be a pastor. I don't even know if you want me to be a pastor. And I want to know right now, because I don't need this. Do you want me here or not? That was my prayer. I mean, it might have been a little more polite than that. Maybe it wasn't. You know, Jeremiah talked pretty straight to God sometimes.
Yeah.
But you read Jeremiah chapter 20, it always makes me go, wow. But anyway, I prayed that prayer. I said amen. I opened the Bible to start my devotional life afresh. And I started right back where I left off. I had my little journal, so I knew where I was supposed to be. The very next verse, John 15:16, he says, "For you did not choose me, but I have chosen you, that you may go forth, that you may bear fruit, and the fruit that you bear might remain."
Oh, man.
And I mean, right there, I remember having that impression from God, okay. And there were some other things that happened shortly thereafter that next week. Someone, random person came up to me and said, "Let me pray with you." I never prayed with them, never had a conversation with them in my life. I'd seen them from a distance. They came up to me, and the first words out of their mouth, I'll never forget. He says, "Lord, perhaps I am a messenger from God you've sent to encourage this young man in the ministry." And all this was happening right there in just a couple of days of me praying that prayer. And so I was like, okay, I get it now. Since then, my prayer has been, "Lord, do you still want me?" You know. Yeah. Because as you said earlier, we struggle. We go up and down, up and down. It's like, "Lord, do you still want me?" And the affirmation is not always that strong, but it always comes.
Yeah. Amen.
So that was back in August of 2018 is where it really hit me.
That's powerful. John?
Yeah. I remember there's small affirmations along the way. And then you have big affirmations. I never intended to be a pastor, didn't even cross my mind, but through the persistence of church members and some pastors in my younger years, that implanted that seed. Hey, I think you'd be a great pastor. I denied it. I ran away from it. I fought it. And it wasn't until my third year in college, I was studying bio-pre-med to become a doctor, to where God had finally got my attention. I was burned out. I didn't really feel passionate about the path I was going on. And I remember going to the Philippines for a vacation to get away, sort of almost like a Jonah experience, except I didn't get swallowed by a whale or a fish, whatever it is.
That'd have been a great story.
That would have been a great story. We crash landed into the water and got swallowed by a fish, but that didn't happen. So I was there on vacation. I was visiting a church, and of course, whenever people find out that you're doing some kind of ministry, they're like, "Hey, why don't you preach?" And I'm just like, first of all, I'm on vacation. Secondly, I have no desire or intention to do so. And then I remember I preached that Sabbath, the following Sabbath, and just seeing their eyes light up, with seeing and hearing the gospel. It was a beautiful moment, and I think that was a moment where I decided to pursue pastoral ministry. But I think the big moment was when I had to tell my dad that I wasn't going to become a doctor and break his heart and destroy his whole dream for me. He wasn't happy about it. I'll tell the full story next time. But I do remember that when we were on our way up to college, to Andrews, and he was in the car, he was silent. And I was like, "What's going on?" In my mind, I'm like, I know he's mad at me. And then he was like, "John, when I was your age, I actually was studying to become a pastor. But there was an opportunity for me to go to the States, to move there, to have a better life for my family. So I took that. And I remember your mom and I were trying so hard to have, a son. And we prayed and we prayed and we told God that if you gave us a son, we'll dedicate him to you." Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. And so he was quiet again, and he said, "John, I believe God is trying to finish what I started in you."
Wow.
And that was the beginning of many affirmations along the way, but that was it. I was just like, well, this clearly was something that I was called to before I was even born.
And God takes our promises
there you go.
seriously.
Yeah, so yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, I had several small things. Like I never had that big aha moment, but it was small things. Like when I went to India after we got married, they asked me to speak at their annual meeting as one of the devotional speakers, and so of course they put me at the early morning, which there was actually a lot of people there for the early morning one, and the power went out. And so they sat there and said they felt bad because the power went out. And so they asked me to speak again the next evening on the main roster. Like they actually, a guy volunteered to step down from his speaking to let me speak. Well, I had no intention of being a pastor. I'd never preached before, and quite honestly, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing. In fact, the topic was on the second coming, and then when I go back to start preparing, I start preparing something that's not very theologically sound, and my wife has to give me a Bible study on the topic I'm going to be preaching on the next night, because I was still very, very new in the church. But because I was different, I was from America, they thought that I would bring in more people, so that's why they wanted to do this. And I remember after I was preaching, I actually had somebody that came up to me, and my wife and I have different memories of who that person was, but it was somebody who was high up in the administration levels of the church. It was a wife of somebody, and I don't remember exactly now who it was. She wrote a book and things like this, and she said, "Where are you studying theology?" And I said, "What's theology?" I didn't even know what theology was. I didn't even have an idea of what that was. And she said, "God's called you to be a pastor." And I'm like, "No," because I just
I think we've all had that reaction. Like, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about.
And then, but afterwards, I had multiple people come to me. It's like, you remind me of Jesus. I'm like, oh goodness, no.
It's the beard.
No, I was clean shaven because I just got out of the military.
All right.
And so, but they say because you tell stories. Because I've always been somebody that likes to tell stories. And so fast forward, like there's so many different things that God just affirmed. But what really kind of I think was like the nail in the coffin. I don't know if that's an appropriate analogy
Very appropriate.
for God's call for renewing of life. The nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
But the final thing that was, I had a member come up to me who was an older member, and we had just finished a prayer meeting series where we went through praying through the sanctuary, and I teach prayer journaling. So I kind of mixed some of the things that I had learned from different people, and I had kind of come up with my own way of praying through the sanctuary and mixing that with prayer journaling. And she sat there and told me this, like, I've been in the church for 70 some odd years, and my prayer life has never been more vibrant than it is right now, and thank you.
Amen.
And then I get a card from the same person years after I'm no longer her pastor, and she sat there and said, "I want to let you know that I still have a vibrant prayer life, and I still pray for you every single day." And that was like, God, that's really, really awesome. We can keep talking. As you can see, all of us are friends and we enjoy conversations.
We left a lot out of all of our stories.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
There's a lot more to it. Maybe we can get you back for another episode, Floyd.
And so, but we're gonna wrap it up. And so we're gonna wrap up this podcast, this episode of this podcast, not the whole podcast, and pass the baton where we're passing on what's been passed to us, a podcast about life ministry and everything in between. And so we just want to thank you guys for watching to this. I don't know how all the podcast things work, but subscribe, like, whatever it is you do. We're still figuring all this kind of stuff out.
Let us know in the comments if you're watching us, if you want Floyd back on our podcast.
And for season
2.
Season 2, we'd love to have you back. But with that, Brother Floyd, since you're our guest, would you mind kind of just wrapping us up with a word of prayer, sir?
Sure. All right. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much. This time together has just awakened in me a realization of how you have been working in our lives, even before we had any idea that we would be serving you in this way, in this capacity. And we thank you for the privilege. We know that it comes with hardship, and those that are listening on this podcast, if their pastors are involved in ministry, can agree with that as well. But ultimately, we give you praise and thanks for the honor that we have in working in this way with you. We thank you for using us, for wanting to use us. And I pray that you would help us to stay in the right relationship with you, that we will recognize you always as creator and us as the creation, and that we might be submitted to your will, and that you will do the work in us that you've called, that you want us to do, and make us to be the men and women of God you've called us to be. So bless those that are listening in their ministry. Give them the power of your Holy Spirit, and the same for us as well. And as we go from here, we put it in your hands with hope in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.